session of our Back to School 2021 series. This is presented by the Syntero school-based team across Franklin, Delaware, and Morrow counties. And this presentation is intended for middle and high school parents for preparing for back to school. Presenting today, we have school-based clinicians, Emily and Elizabeth. So I will turn it over to them to give you some tips and tricks for your middle and high school students.
All right, hello, my name is Emily Likens. As Megan was saying, I am a Syntero clinician in Dublin City Schools. And so today we're kind of going to talk about just some 5 simple tips to kind of help you start to prepare to get your student back into the school and to also help prepare your actual student. So kind of that double fold thing going on. So the top 5 tips are being able to know your own emotions, how you're feeling during this time, having those open conversations with your students, building those positive coping skills in yourself and your students, being able to help them set routines, because we all know summer is the greatest time to get off of those routines, and then just know when to seek some of that extra help. So our first tip is just being able to know your own emotions, how you're feeling during this time and all of that. So as we know, human beings in general just experience a variety of emotions, and as parents, you start to experience a variety of emotions as your students get ready to go back to school. So there might be that little duel of, we're feeling excited to get them out of the house. It's been a very long time. Last year there was a lot of like hybrid schooling, and so the students were partly in home doing school and actually in the school, and so we might be really excited that, hey, they get to go to school for an entire day. We might also be feeling a little nervous about that. What's going to happen? What are some of those different protocols that might come up? And so just kind of giving yourself a chance to recognize what are all of those different emotions I might be feeling, those different conflicting emotions, just to kind of help bring awareness to all of that. And so the biggest thing we want you guys to know is it's okay to feel whatever you are feeling. So like I said before, a lot of parents are going to feel that combination, or sometimes that like those conflicting emotions of, I'm excited and nervous. Maybe I'm feeling really overwhelmed by getting them all the things that they need to have, because last year it was a lot easier, not as many supplies needed to be bought maybe, or things like that. And so just kind of, again, recognizing those emotions that help us then cope with them in constructive ways. So when we're able to say, hey, I am feeling X, Y, and Z thing for this upcoming event or upcoming situation that's going to happen, what are then the steps I can take to kind of help me work through those emotions and not have them control our own bodies and lead us to feeling even more overwhelmed. It's also super important to recognize that our middle and high school students, they do recognize like how we're feeling, even if we don't notice that they are noticing. They can read our body language, our facial expressions, they can hear that tone of voice, and then they start to pick up on, hey, parent caregiver is feeling this way about certain things. Maybe I noticed their voice is a little sharper. Are they feeling stressed? Are they angry? And they start to kind of interpret from what they're picking up from those social situations. And so if we're then able to recognize, this is how I'm feeling this moment, how can I maybe then convey that to them? Maybe letting them know, hey, I'm feeling this way about going back to school. How are you guys feeling about going back to school? It starts to normalize a lot of those different emotions that might be going on. And it starts to model for them too, like, it's okay to talk about those different things, and it's okay to have those conflicting emotions, because I'm sure they're having them as well. And so just kind of considering like, what are some different strategies to help you manage those difficult or big, intense emotions? How can you practice some of these self-care tips or self-care strategies on your own that you can then start to model for your teenagers. And so it could be, I know for me personally, being outside, going for walks, things like that is a very grounding, calming thing for me. And so it could be, hey, as a family, we're going to go take this hike, or we're going to go take a walk, and just have this be a time that maybe we can talk about how we're feeling, or even just a time that we're just going to kind of get distracted from what's going on for a hot second, so our brain isn't constantly thinking about whatever is coming up in the school year. It could also be like limiting the consumption of like news and media. So I know there's been a lot of changes. We always hear new information about things, and then that can kind of feed into, hey, I'm starting to feel more overwhelmed or more anxious about what's coming, because there's so much conflicting news. It's going to lead to conflicting thoughts and conflicting emotions. And so, not saying don't pay attention to it, because we need to know what's happening, especially like what are the protocols when we're going into school and things like that. But just kind of being really aware of how much am I taking this in, or how much are my teenagers taking in like news and media stuff, and how could that then be impacting how they're feeling as they go into this new school year.
Okay, so now we're on tip number 2, open the conversation. Okay, so as we know, talking with our tweens and teens is quite different from when they're younger. So it can be challenging at times, but also very interesting. So it's very important to invite your child, your teenager, to a conversation where you can share with one another how you're feeling, how you're thinking about the return to school. Reflecting back on feelings, even if you disagree, is very important, which means checking in with ourselves as parents, and making sure that we allow ourselves our own emotions and find safe places to deal with those, so that we can be neutral with our kids. So the example right there, it sounds like you're pretty worried about being the only person wearing a mask. Obviously, that a child in any school now going in is not going to be the only one wearing a mask if it isn't mandated or required, but they may feel as though they could be the only one. So being able to empathize is really important as well. Helping your teen to identify things they're looking forward to can be very helpful. I know one thing in our school district here is that we just learned that free lunches are going to be available again this school year. And for us, we're really excited about that. So there are little things that maybe we haven't had in the past pre-pandemic that we can celebrate. Even looking for those things can take a little energy, but they are out there. And also helping our teens identify things that they may be worried about, and talking together about ways to work through those worries. Maybe there's some planning that you can do with your teen, or some organization that you could put in place that could help alleviate some of those worries. And again, as parents, we also know it is very difficult sometimes, because we wish that we could fix our children's problems, but of course we cannot. The very best thing that we can do is to allow space for discomfort, to allow space for uncertainty, to just be able to sit with our child and allow the feelings. And again, as Emily already mentioned, us doing this with our children, with our teens, is teaching them a very important life skill, that it's important to check in with ourselves and to allow these emotions. Emotions come and go, and they are a cue as to what's going on internally. And when we pay attention, then we can use some skills to help move through those emotions and reach some equilibrium. Okay. So preparing for differences. So as we all know, there are likely going to be differences during this upcoming school year compared with the last school year. In fact, we already know that, because the way this school year is starting is that all districts are going 100% in person, whereas last school year, there was the hybrid option, and then some districts also had online academies. So we're already starting out differently, sort of similar to pre-pandemic, but also not because we're still in a pandemic. So helping your teen to prepare for these differences and the changes that may happen along the way is very important. And even at this stage, prior to school beginning, there can be some planning in place for that. So for example, maybe if masks are required, or even if they're not, but you're encouraging your child to wear a mask, identifying now what mask or masks would be good options for your teen versus waiting until the last minute. If your teen hasn't been wearing masks for a while, maybe just start to practice wearing them again in the house or going out, just to sort of become acclimated to that scenario once again. And again, if your child's district has already released specific COVID policies for this coming school year, it would be really a good idea to sit down with your child or with your children and to talk through what those policies are. And again, allow space to just probe your children to see how they're feeling about these policies, about these procedures. And if there's not specific information that has been released yet, then, well, actually, whether or not there has been, it's important to discuss potential changes that may be in place, because what has been already decided or not is likely to change anyway. Okay, I think we're okay.
All right, so now we're going to talk about ways that you can start to help your teens and students kind of build healthy and more positive coping skills. So this again can be a great way to start to practice these skills with them, and it kind of gives a double benefit of you're reaping the benefit of those coping skills, and your student is starting to learn how to use these skills to help regulate their emotions and their thoughts. And so we can really benefit from those like regular reminders to use those self-care practices. So I'm sure there's many a times where you have to remind your teenager, hey, please do this thing, or hey, I'd ask you to do that. We all know they need some of those extra little reminders. And so this can just be that little reminder of like, hey, let's practice this together real quick. Either as you're getting ready to go to school, as a lot of these skills you can use like in the commute to school, like if they're riding the bus or if you're driving them into school, or even if the beginning of the school day is a little too hectic, because I know it can be, sometimes it can be just a rush to get everybody out and into the school building, practicing them the night before as they're getting ready to go to bed, because those emotions, those thoughts, those feelings, things like that can pop up anytime. But the more we practice these with them, the more ingrained it's going to get. And the easier it's going to be for them to recall those skills when they are in some of those like really stressful situations. So kind of like we were saying, just taking that opportunity now when maybe the schedules are a little more flexible because the school year hasn't actually started, to start to practice these. So some of the ones that we have found super helpful, a lot of what we end up teaching our students in the schools when we're working with them, the number one is mindful breathing. Breathing is something we do all the time. We don't have to think about it, but because we don't have to think about it, it can get escalated and quicker or things like that. And then that can start to like magnify some of those emotions. And so when we're intentional about our breathing or mindful about it, it can really start to slow down those big overwhelming emotions, slow down the thoughts, and kind of give them that chance to really reflect back. So just taking some slow, deep breaths, trying to focus at like one point in between your inhale and your exhale. And then it can also be useful to like count your breaths. So always want that slow inhale. Your exhale wants to be even slower, even longer. So it could be like a count in for 4, hold for 1, breathe out for 6, or whatever feels comfortable for them, and just kind of help them work through that, just to take those really slow, intentional breaths. Another one that's super fun to do, like when you're driving in the car, is a sensory grounding activity. So identifying 5 things that they can see, 4 things that they can touch and feel, 3 things that they can hear, 2 things that they might be able to smell, and 1 thing that they could taste. Now, I know sometimes smell and taste can be a little hard. And so what we teach our students is, if there's nothing you can like smell right now, what are 2 of your favorite smells that like make you feel happy and warm and fuzzy inside? Or what's your favorite flavor of whatever, and kind of imagine what that is. Or even just grabbing your water, or if you're doing this with your kid, maybe your coffee, and saying like, what does that feel like in my mouth? What does that taste like? Stuff like that. So again, just to kind of help ground them in right here, right now, and not focusing on like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? On those like future things that like we can't really control right now. We might not have all the information about it. So finding a rhythm. So encouraging any activity that uses rhythm. So like going for a walk, going for a run, listening to music and like tapping along with that. Even just like slow tapping, like on your hands or on your knees, and just kind of getting that like bilateral, so like that side to side movement is a very regulating and calming thing for students. It could also be coloring. I know some teenagers are probably like, oh, that's not a fun thing to do. I still love to color when I get a chance to. And so it could just be like, hey, let's do a quick little doodle together. Or like, I just got you this really cool coloring book. Use it if you want to. And if you don't want to, it's fine. But just kind of at least giving them that other option. So just a couple of different skills. Some of these they can use anywhere, everywhere. Others of them maybe are a little more specific to like, here are skills you can use at home. Here are skills you can use at school. The other things are just like different unique hobbies or talents that can also be coping skills. So like if your student is like super musically inclined, writing a song that helps them kind of express, this is how I'm thinking, this is how I'm feeling right now. I'm going to get this all out in a song or in a poem or whatever it might be. If they do dance or any kind of things like that, like working out those feelings into like some kind of a movement, those can also be super helpful.
Okay, so tip number 4, setting the routine. Oh, yes. So we have had summer, which I know in my household, I have 2 teenagers, just so you know. There has not been nearly the routine that is typical during a school year. And then, of course, we're coming off a very unusual school year anyway, where all the routines that we typically had historically were not in place. So we have wonderful opportunity for the creation of new routines. And I think we probably all know that when we have a routine, we have a structure, it helps us stay focused and it helps alleviate our stress. We all have definitely felt that loss of control and self-efficacy during the pandemic. And I think each of us in our own ways we've figured out how to function within that. And our children have too in many ways. And so now, how can we continue to hone our skills and refine things in our households so that we can have routines that are working for each individual as well as for the whole home? And it can look different for different kids, different parents, different temperaments, etc. So some of the things to consider when you are looking at building new routines is, what will it look like before school? What will it look like after school? And what will it look like in the evening? So sort of breaking routines up into different sections of the day can be really helpful. Another component of this also is to really prioritize sleep. We talk often with students about sleep hygiene. There are definite principles of sleep hygiene that are very important. But one is making sure there's enough sleep happening, especially for students each night. But in addition to that, there are things like putting away screens at least 30 minutes before bed, trying to go to bed around the same time every night, trying to wake up around the same time every morning. So just sort of being mindful of things that you can put in place now. Maybe it's getting a new alarm clock, or you can now get alarm clocks that actually use light to help wake you up, not just sounds, and they can actually be very effective. So looking at what resources may be available to you that you could acquire to help implement or set and implement routines can be really helpful. I think also an important piece is whatever you can do with a routine so that you can prevent having battles with your teens is a really good idea. So like writing lists, so then your child's accountable to the list versus you as the parent having to continue to remind your child. You still might anyway need to keep reminding your child, but the more that you can say, oh, just go check the list, it's helping to forge a positive relationship with your child. And just remembering to praise your child when they stick with a routine is really helpful as well. And to praise for specifics. Look at how well you did following the routine today. You brushed your teeth, you made your bed, stuff like that. So that builds their self-esteem and helps motivate them to keep going with the routine. Okay. Go to the next slide.
Won't let me. There we go.
Oh, so some tips are to start now, which I know we've already mentioned. So planning ahead. I know some schools, I know one district started today actually, but I think most districts are starting next week or the following week. So looking now at what you can already put in place. In our household, we're practicing going to bed earlier because I don't know about you, but for many people in the summer, sort of the sleep routine goes a little bit out the window. So we're practicing good sleep hygiene in our house to get ready for the transition. And then this idea of giving your teen as many choices as possible is really helpful as well. It eliminates battles and it's empowering for your teen. So when they feel they have choice, that it gives them a sort of a feeling of control, which is really important. In the meantime, of course, you as the parent are still maintaining the control in a sense, but your child has perceived control, which is really helpful for development and for growth. So, and then helping your child think through things like, okay, so in the routine, what do we need to build in to make sure that you have enough time to do things like your homework or spend time on practicing your instrument or whatever. So maybe identifying some goals as part of the routine can be helpful. And then making sure that your teen is able to participate in extracurricular activities is also obviously very important. There is all kinds of stuff available in the schools in terms of clubs. Music is available in almost every school. So helping your teen identify where they could land, maybe at school, maybe outside of school, to have that social connection and to be able to develop something they're interested in can be really helpful as well.
Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more into like what to do if we feel like, hey, I just need extra support, extra help with what may be going on with my student right now. So as we go into the beginning of the school year, it's a big change. There is always going to be some kind of a disruption in their normal functioning when a big change happens. So you might notice, hey, they're a little extra grumpy right now, or they're a little more exhausted, or they're just like not sharing as much as they used to. And it could just be, hey, they're going back to school for the first time, like for a full day in over a year right now, or most of our students are going back for the first time. And so with those big changes, it's normal to have a short-term change in their behavior and in their habits, things like that. Now, if we start to see these like really big, extreme, like emotional reactions or responses that continue for an extended period of time, so like 2 weeks or more, that's when we might want to start to think, is there extra support I can get my student linked up with? Is there that extra anxiety that they might be feeling that hasn't ever been before in the school year? Are they starting to like avoid school when that's never been something that has happened before? Kind of like those temper tantrums, having those huge, big emotional reactions. And so those are some of those things that kind of can bring a little bit of those like red flags, like something else might be going on and what can I do to help support my student for the best. Now, it's also super important to keep in the back of our minds too that like most of our students, just like us when we go to work, we keep things together when we're at work or when they are at school. We have our thoughts, our feelings that might pop up if somebody frustrates us or there's an overwhelming assignment that maybe we're given, but we're able to kind of keep things in check when we are in those situations or areas. And then when we go home, that's a safe, comfortable space. We let our guard down, we let our emotions out, we let our thoughts and our feelings loose and free. And our students do the exact same thing. And so they might be able to hold it all together while they're actually in the school. And then when they come home, they're kind of releasing all of that stuff. And unfortunately, as parents, we're the brunt of a lot of that. And so kind of remind ourselves to like, hey, are these things that maybe I can just kind of in those slides earlier on of like, hey, I'm noticing you're a little upset right now. Do you want to talk about what's going on? Do you want me to give you a little bit of space just to kind of let all this stuff out for a little bit? Are there different skills that we can work on, different activities that you want to try to do to kind of get those emotions out for a little bit? But then again, like if you're noticing like this is a really big reaction to maybe something that's not super big or concerning, or this is happening for a very long extended period of time, then again, those are like red flags where we're like, let's see what else we might be able to get them into. And so here's just a little list of some different additional supports and resources. This isn't an exhaustive list, so you guys might in your own community be like, oh, hey, here's a whole bunch of other resources I can get my student linked up into, and that's awesome. But here are just some really helpful ones. So your natural community support. So if you have your own parent group that you're like, hey, can I check in with them and be like, this is what my student is doing right now. Like, do you have any tips and advice to help me through this right now? If you are connected with like a faith-based community or anything like that, going to your churches, asking for those types of resources. Extended family can be awesome as well. Any kind of those community resources. Also checking in with their guidance counselor, seeing like, hey, do you have any tips for me? Or like school social workers, people like that. Again, if we're noticing like there's that extended period of time where like maybe they're like extra anxious, or we're noticing like these really big changes in their behaviors and their personalities, we can go to their pediatrician too and just say, hey, this is something we're noticing. Can we just talk through this and check it out? At all of the schools in Franklin County that Syntero serves, there is a Syntero clinician. Rephrase that. Most of the schools, there is a Syntero clinician. Or, of course, you can always go to their guidance counselor, but that can be another form of support too, where they can get linked up for a few short prevention sessions. Words are hard today, apparently, to just kind of help them process and work through some of those different thoughts and feelings that are going on, and learning some extra good, healthy coping skills. And then also there might just be times where, hey, I really need to take this even to a higher level of care. And so at Syntero, we do also offer some outside outpatient counseling. So that would be like outside of school services. And this is our intake department that you can always call and just say, this is what's going on with my student right now. I'd really love to get them linked up. And our intake department is amazing and awesome, and they will help you through just kind of navigating that course. You can also, if you know of other resources, you can also reach out to them as well. So that's that.
All right. Thank you, Emily and Elizabeth. So hopefully everyone was hearing some tips or ideas that could be helpful for their particular student. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording so that we can get into some breakout rooms.